In the land where the mountains met the heavens, a monastery stood as a testament to tranquility and wisdom. Here, among the ancient stones and whispering pines, lived a monk named Alok, who possessed a profound insight into the human soul. His gift was not through words, but through the silent language of gestures and glances. Alok's teachings were sought after not just by the devoted monks, but by lay people who came from distant lands, yearning to understand the depths of their own minds and those of others around them. His reputation was such that even the local sovereign, a king of great power and curiosity, sought his counsel. The king arrived at the monastery with a dilemma that weighed heavily upon his heart. He needed to choose an advisor from his court, but the burden of deceit and flattery among his courtiers clouded his judgment. Alok, sensing the king's unrest, offered to teach him a lesson in discerning truth from mere appearance. They sat in the monastery's garden where the air was fragrant with jasmine. Alok pointed to a pair of birds perched on a blooming branch, their feathers ruffled by a gentle breeze. The older bird stood still, its gaze steady and composed, while the younger one fidgeted, looking here and there with swift, jerky movements. "Your Highness," Alok began, "observe these birds. The elder is calm, content, and its stillness speaks of assurance. The younger one, restless and ever-moving, shows its eagerness and impatience. Similarly, humans reveal their thoughts and intentions, not just in their words, but in their stance, their movements, and the focus of their gaze." The king watched intently, noting how the younger bird's movement seemed to betray a certain anxiety, while the elder's composure suggested a quiet confidence. Alok continued, "When you next sit with your courtiers, observe them as you do these birds. Who holds your gaze with calmness? Who shifts in their seat? Who gestures too grandly? These are the silent utterances of the mind." Through Alok's guidance, the king learned to look beyond the spoken words, to read the truth in the quiet language of the body. And as the days passed, the king found himself understanding his courtiers' unspoken thoughts and feelings with a clarity he had never known before. As the sun rose over the kingdom, casting a golden glow upon the palace, the king began to apply the lessons taught by Alok. With a newfound awareness, he summoned his courtiers, intending to observe them as the monk had instructed. The grand hall, usually a place of loud debates and proclamations, took on a new dimension in the king's eyes. He watched, not as a ruler this time, but as an observer of the silent play of human expression. Each courtier, unaware of the silent scrutiny, continued to parade their counsel cloaked in eloquent phrases and flattering words. The king noticed one advisor, whose eyes darted like a startled deer whenever a challenging topic arose, his hands clasped tightly together as if to hold back his true thoughts. Another, with a reputation for wisdom, spoke little, but when he did, his steady gaze and open palms resonated with a sincerity that the king now saw was genuine. Days turned into weeks, and with each gathering, the king's skill in discerning the unsaid grew more refined. He began to see the court not as a collection of individuals vying for favor, but as a tapestry of emotions and ambitions, communicated through posture, gesture, and the subtle play of features. The king's insight into his court deepened, and he found himself better equipped to navigate the undercurrents of his palace. Decisions that once seemed clouded by ambiguity now became clearer as he learned to trust the silent messages over the spoken ones. One evening, as the dusk settled and the stars began their nightly vigil, the king sat with Alok in the monastery's serene garden. They spoke of the day's lessons, and Alok listened, his face aglow with the light of the moon. "Your teachings have opened my eyes," the king said. "The court has become an open book, and I find that I can almost hear the thoughts of my advisors in their silences." Alok nodded, a soft smile on his lips. "Silence," he mused, "is often louder than words. It is in stillness that we hear the truth, for it whispers before it decides to shout." The king's newfound skill was not just a tool for governance, but became a bridge to deeper connections with his people. It was a late autumn evening when a dispute brought this into full light. Two farmers, their faces etched with worry and anger, sought the king's judgment over a land boundary that each claimed as his own. In the throne room, under the watchful eyes of his court, the king listened to the farmers' heated claims. One farmer's voice boomed loud and his gestures wide, attempting to dominate the space with his presence. The other, less ostentatious, spoke with a tremor in his voice, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his tunic, his eyes downcast not in submission but in something akin to shame. Recalling Alok's teachings, the king observed beyond their words. The louder farmer, while assertive, had a fleeting gaze, his eyes rarely meeting the king's, as if avoiding an invisible threat. His expansive gestures seemed to mask an underlying insecurity. The quieter farmer, despite his nervous demeanor, showed moments of stillness when he spoke of the land, his eyes clearing, and his stance solidifying with a genuine attachment. The king proposed a walk to the disputed land, much to the surprise of his court. There the farmers showed the boundaries as they remembered them. The boisterous farmer paced the land with quick, erratic steps, while the other walked with a measured tread, his hand often brushing the crops with a tender familiarity that spoke of years of care. The truth unfolded not in the farmer's words, but in their walk, their touch, the connection each showed to the land. It became clear to the king who the true caretaker of the land was. His judgment favored the quieter farmer, whose body language revealed a sincere bond with the soil he toiled. That evening, in the quiet contemplation with Alok, the king shared, "The land spoke through the farmers today. It was as if I could feel the truth emanating from their very beings, not in shouts, but in whispers." Alok nodded, his gaze reflecting the wisdom of the stars above. "The body," he imparted, "is a reflection of the soul, and each person, like a mirror, reflects the truth in their stance, their walk, their touch. You are learning to see the mirror beneath the mask, Your Majesty." As the moon cycled and the seasons painted the kingdom in varying hues, the king's reputation flourished not only as a fair ruler, but also as a leader with an uncanny understanding of his people. The kingdom prospered, and with prosperity came visitors from faraway lands, bringing with them new challenges and intrigues. A delegation from a neighboring kingdom arrived with grand fanfare, bearing gifts and words of alliance. Among them was a diplomat, whose silver tongue wove words of friendship and cooperation. The court was charmed by the diplomat's eloquence, but the king reserved his judgment. He recalled Alok's caution that words were like the wind, felt but not seen, and often shifting direction unexpectedly. During a banquet held in the delegation's honor, the king observed the diplomat interacting with his court. The diplomat's smile was quick to come, but slow to reach his eyes, which scanned the room with a calculating glint. His laughter was too hearty, his backslaps a little too firm, gestures not of warmth but of a desire to assert dominance. The king also noticed his own advisers, some swayed by the diplomat's charisma, others showing subtle signs of skepticism, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a brief pursing of lips. The king saw the unspoken concerns of his advisers, the silent alarms that rang clear amidst the din of the feast. Later, under the quietude of the star-strewn sky, the king sought Alok's presence. "The diplomat speaks of peace, yet I sense a discord in his melody," the king confided. Alok listened, his presence as calming as the night's embrace. "Trust the feelings that arise from silent observation, Your Majesty," he advised. "The dance of motives is often hidden in plain sight for those who are attuned to see it." Armed with this insight, the king engaged the diplomat in a game of chess, a subtle dance of strategy and wit. As the pieces moved across the board, so too did the king observe the unguarded moments. The flicker of doubt in the diplomat's eyes, the brief clench of jaw when a pawn was lost, the forced composure when the king advanced. The game revealed more than the diplomat's skill at chess. It unmasked his facade. The king perceived an undercurrent of desperation, a silent tale of a kingdom not seeking an alliance, but a savior from its own internal conflicts. With this revelation, the king navigated the negotiations with caution, offering support but not at the expense of his kingdom's autonomy. The alliance was formed, but on terms that safeguarded his people's future. Time flowed like the endless river beyond the monastery, carrying with it the ebb and flow of the kingdom's fortunes. The king, now seasoned in the unspoken dialect of the body, found himself more attuned to the pulse of his realm. His council meetings were exercises in silent communication as much as they were in vocal debate. It was during one such council that a matter of great urgency arose. A neighboring province was in turmoil, and rumors of rebellion were spreading like wildfire. The king's generals urged for immediate action, for shows of strength to quell the brewing storm. But the king, observing the tense shoulders, the restless hands, and the averted gazes of his generals, sensed a deeper unease. It was a fear not of the rebellion but of the unknown, the shadows that every flame of conflict casts. Seeking clarity, the king visited the province disguised as a common traveler, accompanied only by a trusted advisor. As they journeyed, the king observed the people. Their weary eyes, their hurried whispers, their stooped figures burdened not just by labor, but by the weight of suppressed grievances. In a humble village, under the guise of seeking shelter, the king shared a meal with a family. He listened to their stories, watching their faces light up with love for their land and darken with pain at their plight. The tightness in their expressions when speaking of the rulers revealed not a desire for rebellion, but a plea for empathy, for recognition. Returning to his court, the king called for another council. This time he shared his observations, describing the villagers' expressions and postures with such vividness that the council could almost see the people before them. Our strength, the king concluded, lies not in the might we display, but in the compassion we show. Our response must be one that heals, not harms. The decision was made to send envoys to the province, not with swords, but with offers of dialogue and aid. The rebellion was averted not by force, but by addressing the unspoken needs of the people, needs that the king had read in the silent language of their bodies. Years passed, and the king's wisdom became as renowned as the ancient peaks that cradled his kingdom. His ability to read the unspoken had brought about an era of prosperity and peace, and tales of his benevolent reign traveled far and wide. As the autumn of his rule approached, a great assembly was called. Monks from the monastery, dignitaries from distant lands, and his own people gathered to honor the king. It was a celebration of a reign marked by an understanding that transcended words, a testament to the power of silent knowledge. The king, with hair now silver as the moon, addressed the assembly. His voice, tempered with the passage of time, carried the weight of experience. "We speak in many tongues, but our truest conversation is with the language of the heart," he said. "It is a language that knows no boundary, no caste, no creed, and it is understood by all, for it is spoken by our very being." The crowd listened, moved by his words and the profound silence that followed, a silence that spoke volumes. At the king's side stood Alok, his mentor and friend, whose teachings had illuminated the path of many. Alok's eyes shone with quiet pride, for he knew that the king's greatest legacy was not the battles won or the wealth amassed, but the bridge of understanding he had built between his heart and the hearts of his people. As the stars emerged to bear witness to the twilight of the ceremony, the king offered one last piece of wisdom to those gathered. "Seek not to fill the silence with noise, but strive to listen to the whisperings of the world, for in those whispers lies the truth that binds us all." The assembly dispersed, but the lesson lingered, carried in their minds and hearts. The king's insight into the human soul, gleaned from the silent conversations of body and gesture, became a guiding echo for generations to come. And so, the story of the king who spoke the silent language of empathy and understanding became a legend, a narrative that continued to teach the art of reading beyond words, the art of truly listening to the unspoken needs and desires of humanity.